Alright, so the first thing we want to do for this demo is to load up the Sukhoi 30 project file, which you guys can download. So please go over and set your project to the Sukhoi 30 project, and when you open, I want you to go and open the SU30 number 16 original. Okay, please open that one, and you should see the plane all nicely lined up, okay, according to the directions here. Okay, so the thing about Maya is, or next time when you guys are working in Maya or any 3D program for that matter, in the production pipeline, right, we need to actually set a scale. So I'm using this jet plane as an example. Now this jet plane has real world dimensions, and if you go to Google to search about this aircraft, the documented length of this aircraft is 21.9 meters. 21.9 meters. So usually when we work in production or animation production or doing 3D, there's a set scale that we need to work at. Now for Maya, when you start Maya, right, the default units, right, that every square represents is always in centimeters, the default. So in order to change the default to something else to match the dimensions that you're working on, you have to go over to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and Preferences. Let me just pause that for a while. So this is where you will access all the preferences for the settings in Maya. So it's under the Windows menu, Settings and Preferences, and Preferences. So let's go and access that. So when you click on Preferences, right, you come to this General Preferences window, and you can have access and you can change all the settings to every part of Maya. Okay, so the part that we are interested in is the main category itself, which is settings. Alright, so when you click on settings, you will see the units, the working units that you are in. And currently you can see that the default is set to centimeter. Alright, so we do not want to work at centimeter, we have to work in meters. So we have to click on the drop down and change it to meter. Now watch very carefully to the grid here. When I change it to meters, especially in the 3D perspective view here, when I change it to meter, right, you see the grid suddenly becomes very big in all the three windows. So now we are no longer working in centimeters, we are now working in meters. So now our job is to make sure and ensure that this aircraft is scaled to the correct dimensions. And if we refer to the Wikipedia page about this aircraft again, the length of the aircraft is 21.9 meters, actually close to 22 meters. So we need to rescale this aircraft, right, until it matches the dimensions. So let's say that you're working in a production, you are modeling a character, you're modeling an object, and then you need to pass it over to the next stage of the production pipeline. You created a character, you need to pass it down to the rigging artist. So you need to set the scale first. So currently, obviously, right, this scale is wrong. You can see the plane is now very tiny. So we need to scale this aircraft up. But if we try to select all the parts here and we press R to scale, what's going to happen is that all the pieces are going to scale into one another because all the parts has its own center pivot point. So let me undo that. Press that to undo. So what we need to do is, there are a couple of ways. You can group them. You can use the group, edit group, and then you can scale the group, and then everything will scale together. That's one way. Another way, let me just undo that. Okay, another way is to parent it in to an empty object. Alright, so I'm going to create an empty object, create empty, or the locator. Alright, so I'm going to create something called a locator. And I use the word empty because that is the term that they use in other 3D programs. Okay, in 3D Studio Max they call this a dummy. In Blender they call it an empty, and in Maya they call it a locator. So I'll create a locator. You can see this locator is this cross thing. It doesn't have any dimensions, or rather it doesn't have any physical mesh to display. It's just this total of 3 lines representing the 3 axes. So if you go over to the outliner, you can locate the locator, okay, pardon the pun, over here. Right, so this is the locator. So we want to parent all the parts, right, to the locator. So right now the locator is sitting smack in the center. So how do we get the parts to be the child of the locator? So we can select everything first, and holding down the control, left mouse click and deselect the locator. Then holding down the shift and then left mouse click on the locator again, so that the locator becomes the last item selected. Then after that you press P for parent. And now you can see the outliner becomes very clean. Then all our parts are now living under the locator, or become a child of the locator. So now we can click on the locator, okay? And then you can see everything else will be selected, and we can scale everything up until it is about 20 meters. So we're gonna roughly scale this up first. And you'll notice one thing that starts to be looking a little bit odd. The display, right, start to look very strange. You get all these fluttering things that's going on. And also, you notice that when I zoom the camera further back, I'm holding my Alt key, and then you can use hold down your right mouse button, and if you move your mouse up and down, you can see that something is clipping the plane as I move further away. So what happens is that when we change the scaling of our world, right, we also affect the clipping distance of the camera. So how do we fix this? And also, how do we fix this very nasty looking black spots that is on your plane? Right, I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So you go over to look for the perspective camera. So right now we are looking through the perspective view. The perspective is actually being controlled by the camera, and it is represented in the outliner over here. Okay. So a couple of ways that you can select it. You can click on select the camera on the icon here. So now the camera is selected, or you can go to the outliner and select it. So if you take a look over the top left hand corner, this is the selection of the camera. So now the camera is selected, you can see the properties of the camera. So this only shows the dimensions and the position of the camera. We want to go into the details, the attributes of the camera. So go over to the attribute editor, and then you can see the camera icon will appear, and then here we can change all sorts of things, focal length, the angle of view, and so on. And what we are interested in is this value here, the near clip plane and the far clip plane. So we want to make sure that we can view the plane, right, from whatever distance. Right now it's only limited to 100 units or 100 meters. So when I move the camera further than 100 meters, it starts to clip the plane. Okay, so let's select the camera again. Let's go over to the attribute editor, and we're going to increase this value to 300 meters. Okay, so now when I move further than 300 meters, right, the plane, yeah, now this is 300 meters before it starts to get clipped. Okay, but how do we get this nasty flickering thing that's on the surface of this aircraft? Okay, so you can fix that by adjusting the near clip value. Okay, go to the near clip value and change the value to 1 meters. And now we do not have this black surface display problem anymore. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is that we want to make sure that this aircraft is scaled exactly to 21.9 meters. All right, now we can count the number of squares to 21 meters or 22 meters and then try to scale it that. But I'm going to introduce you to a tool which you can get a precise measurement. That is under Create, Measure Tools, Distance. Right, I'm going to pause the screen here and zoom in and show you here. So under Create, Measure Tools, Distance Tool. So click on that, Create, Measure Tools, Distance Tool. And now, if you look at our tool options, right, we are now in the Measure Tool Creation mode. All right, so in order to make sure that this is exactly 21.9 meters, we need to go over to our top view. Right, go to the top view, and then start to click on one end, and then click on the other end. And then straight away it will tell you the distance that is between here. Now, if you want this to be precise, you want this to lock down to the grid here, first we need to switch back to selection mode or press Q. Then click on the locators. Now you notice there are 2 locators for the measure tool. Then we want to lock it to the grid. So to lock it to the grid, press W, hold down to the X key, and then we can snap it to the grid. And then select this one, holding down to X, and we can snap it to the grid. So now you see we have exactly 20 meters. indicated by the measure tool. And since our plane is 21.9, we can now move one end of the locator until the numbers show about 21.9 meters. Okay, so I'm going to move it to 21.9, try my best to move it as close as I can. So let me just zoom in a bit so that I don't have to move it so much. Okay, right about there. Okay, 21.91, okay, this is close enough. Okay, so now with that, I can select my locator, okay, for the jet plane. Then I can press R to scale. Okay, make sure you scale uniformly, scale uniformly. Click on it, and then we're going to scale it, and then also we're going to move it and until it matches. Now, if you want to scale it, I'm not sure whether I can change the pivot point of this. Well, actually I can. So you can move the pivot point to the tail here. Right, then press D to get out, and then you can use scale and uniform scale so that you can grow it from one point. Okay, so that is one way you can use to scale the aircraft until it matches the dimensions. So I'm gonna scale it one more time until it matches the tail and the nose matches the distance. So now I get the aircraft right to match the dimensions. So again, I have to emphasize why this is so critical. In a lot of production pipelines, right, the scale is very important. In the past, right, I never really go through this with my other students. So when they create their models, right, and they create it separately, and then when they put it together, all the scales are all over the place. And once you have set the scale right, you want to freeze the transformation. All right. Right now you can see I scaled it like 105 times. So I'll freeze the transformation, and it should propagate down to all the parts. All right. So if not, you will have to go to every individual part. You can see now everything has been standardized to 111. Okay. So now I freeze the transformation. All the children will inherit the 111 scale. Okay. The next thing we want to do is to bring in the two couple. Right. So I told you guys already to go and download it from your exercise files. The couple FPX. Couple FPX. So we're going to bring in the two characters. So I already placed it in my assets folder. Click on File, Import. Then go over to the assets folder and then import it in. And we should have a couple of characters, which I'm going to select and then move them out. So if you have done your scale properly, you'll notice that now the aircraft and then the characters are into scale. Now both of these characters are about 1.8 meters. Alright, so let's take a look at both of them in the front view. You'll notice that the lady is a bit, in fact the lady is the same height as the guy because she's wearing high heels. So let's say your art director says that, okay, I want to bring her down maybe 1.7 or 1.6 meters, or scale her down 1.6 meters. So you can use the measure tool again. So I'm going to create the measure tool again. And since my measure tool, the icon is still here, if not, you can go to create measure tool, the distance tool. So I will hold down to, actually I will just click at the bottom here, go to measure tool and create. Actually I created already, but the problem is I can't see the measure tool. So sometimes in order to see I already created the first point, but when I click on it right in the front view, I can't see this locator at all. So I will create it in the 3D view, perspective view. Okay, this is one of the problems that might happen. So let's see. Okay, right now this the first point right is created. I'll create the second point, but it is locked to the bottom of the grid. Okay, so for this one, I will have to select this locator. I have to go to selection mode, select the locator, press W to move, and then move it up right in front. Then select these two locators. You need to push this back until it is behind the grid, like that. Then I can go to the front view. Then now I can see the measurement tool. Alright, and first I need to lock them into the grid. So I'll select the locator, one of the locators here. Holding down to X, lock it to here, then select the bottom locator, holding down to X and lock it. And you can see it's measuring 2 meters. Alright, so now since I want the locator, and again right now it's locked is actually locked to the front view again. Let me go to perspective view, and let me select these two, and maybe push it forward. Okay, make sure that it's behind. It's actually behind, so I don't know why I cannot see the locator. Okay, maybe the locator is not visible, but I can adjust it now to 1.65 meters. Let's say your art director says that, oh, okay, I want the female character to be 1.65 meters. So now I get the exact measurement already. So now I can select the lady here, and just nice, her scale is at the bottom. I can scale her uniformly down until she is at this height. Okay, so there's one use case that you can do. All right, so what I want you all to do is to try this out on your own. Try to play with these tools, okay, and understand that scaling, right, is very important in 3D, okay, 3D production, because you need to get the measurements right. And then later in your exams and tests, you're required to make sure that your objects that you measure are in the correct dimensions. Okay, so with that, I'll stop the recording, and I want you guys to try this out now.